single case can become bigger when then we discover that maybe the food is distributed in 20 member states. So it's very important to coordinate the communication also with the member state, because different messages could create great confusion in consumers, panic, and huge consequences. The risk communication definition, maybe, I'm sorry it's not so clear, the white on the screen, but you see, is the interactive exchange of information and opinions between, throughout the risk analysis process, among all the actors, risk assessors, risk managers, consumers, feed and food business, the academia, and other eventual interested parties like media. Okay? And it should include the explanation of the risk assessment findings and the basis of the risk management decision. But as outlined by Alberto, also the measures usually that could be taken by the companies, but most importantly by the consumers to avoid and mitigate the risk. This is often forgotten, but the first thing to say when you communicate the risk to the public is what they have to do to avoid to be poisoned. That's the first rule. It's simple, it's common sense, okay, but can help to mitigate many hysteric reactions from consumers, to have a simple advice about what to do. Then we have this interesting document. You have all the reference at the end of my presentation in the booklet. EFSA published after the risk communication guidelines that will be updated every year in case there is need. Also a checklist, and you can find the link. So you can see there is a lot ongoing in EFSA. Every year they do also crisis management exercise inside EFSA. They organize working groups and they do exercise simulating crisis situation. You can find reports on EFSA website also on these exercises. They are very long and very complex, so there's no time to explain, but it's really interesting to see how our system works to read these practical cases. There has been published in 2015. Here you can find the full link, you cannot miss it. But recently, just a couple of weeks ago, has been published also interesting documents by the WHO, World Health Organization, and FAO on the same topic. The name is slightly different, but it's a 100-page document. I briefly checked what's inside, and more or less the content and the advice are the same. They are really well in line with the EFSA documents. But it's another interesting reading. Risk communication role in the risk management decision, in the risk analysis process. Through effective risk communication, first of all, we should ensure that consumers are aware of the risks. Again, that's the first part. And they can use the product safely. Then the most important role probably of the risk communication is to build public confidence, trust in the authority, trust in the risk management decision, trust in the risk assessment. And that's probably where at the moment we have more problems, because probably you know that each decision of EFSA today is under fire. They took position on bisphenol A, and they were challenged by other authorities in member states. They took position on GMOs, they were challenged. Glyphosate, they were challenged, and so on. And the same, from my experience working in the United States, is happening with EFSA. The mistrust in science is growing and growing in the consumer. So we have to strengthen the risk communication. Otherwise, we cannot solve this gap. Another political problem probably in Europe is that one, that often EFSA is left alone in communicating the risk. You saw it's a shared responsibility between the Commission and EFSA. But since the member states are allowed to have their own food safety authority, to do risk communication, in my opinion, EFSA should be more protected on a political side, because if any time they said something, France tell the opposite, as said before, we create confusion in the normal people, which cannot really understand what is good and what is bad, what is wrong, what is right in science. Contribute to the public understanding of the risk, clearly. Provide fair, accurate, and appropriate information so that consumers are able to choose what to do, and they can create their own risk acceptance criteria. We should make sure that the consumers are considering the exposure to the risk acceptable, not us, which have a technical background and a scientific preparation. For us, it's simple. Guiding principles of the document: openness, and on these guiding principles, you will see EFSA is doing an amazing work, I have to say honestly. Openness. Openness means that risk assessments are published, are publicly available, are made public in a timely way, so usually immediately, and the decisions are scrutinized. Open dialogue with stakeholders and interested parties in another aspect of openness. And that's why, following a bit the American model, we are doing more and more public consultation now in EU to try to involve the stakeholders and involve them in a transparent way, not just in closed meetings and working groups. Transparency is another phase of openness, but transparency is more often related to how the risk assessment is made and how the organization works, its governance, its management of the conflict of interest. EFSA has clear procedures in place, written procedures to manage the conflict of interest. It's often attacked because their panel could not be independent. The scientists probably can work also for the food companies, but the legal unit in EFSA is doing conflict of interest all day. Isn't just this topic occupying an entire legal unit. So compared to other international organizations like WHO, the work on transparency is huge. When WHO assessed the red meat and tell that it could be carcinogenic in certain doses and so on, we didn't have studies available. We didn't know very well how the panel was composed, if the scientists were independent or not. So EFSA is often criticized, but it's one of the best examples if you go through the regulations of management of the conflict of interest, of transparency. It should be independent, and again, we are in the same loop. Okay, if I have to take the best scientists in the world on GMOs, probably it's impossible to find someone which has never worked with the companies. And then international companies have a lot of money, a lot of capability. They are on the top of innovation. If I don't work in the companies or with the companies, it's difficult to be on the top of things, honestly. That's the real thing. So we should take decision about this point. It's acceptable that scientists declaring their independence, put under scrutiny, can have relationships with the companies or not. If the answer is no, probably we have to create scientific bodies inside EFSA, inside other organizations, totally independent, paid by the organization, to assess and review the scientific literature. There's no middle way, in my opinion. Or we keep open, or we decide to do this internally. Just for your reference, experts that are working for EFSA today are not paid. So they are called by EFSA to participate in the panels, but they are not paid. So clearly they cannot do that as a full-time job. Responsiveness and timeliness. So early communication is crucial. We cannot allow a long process of risk assessment, because sometimes we have to communicate in a few days. So I have procedures in place to give urgent advice to the European Commission. Usually when we have big problems in 1 week, few days, we have a first preliminary opinion by EFSA on the situation. Another really important topic, address uncertainty and how we address uncertainty when we communicate. As said, late answers in front of uncertainty undermine trust and leave space for speculation. If there is uncertainty and we fail to communicate for 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, probably speculation will start, especially if the case is public, but also when it's not public, at a certain point things slip through the net and go to the media, go to some source of information, and then the speculation starts, and maybe a minor problem become big in a few hours. Where there is uncertainty, it should not be avoided for the same reason. It should be acknowledged, described, and data gaps should be explained. Also the issue relating to the methodology, because we start from sometimes from the assumption that the media or the journalist is unprepared, is the bad guy, is just trying to put the news on the screen to make money. But in the end, it's his work to find stories and find something to say. So if we leave doubts, if we leave open questions, it's their job to investigate in the end. They are not the bad guy. I'm not the best friend of journalists as well, but it's their work. They have to do what they are paid for. So the best way is to address this kind of problem and to explain them to the public. And the most delicate part is to make sure that the intended audience can understand what we are saying, the steps that are being taken. We have to reassure the public. We have to speak a simple language. Otherwise, our explanation won't be understood. And people say, well, yes, they told us that everything is good, that this food is safe, that we can go on quietly, but no, I'm not convinced it's a lie. That's the normal reaction of the public when the language is too difficult. That's why short press releases are very useful, both for the authorities and for companies. A few lines, very simple, with normal languages, telling the consumers what we have to do and why we have this kind of uncertainties. The example proposed by Alberto was quite clear. The uncertainty was high. We don't know if the risk is present or not. Don't consume the eggs. Okay. For 1 month, we will notice you later on if we have problems or the issue is solved. It's quite simple. The dialogue with risk managers and stakeholders is again of capital importance. You can find for each of these topics entire chapters in EFSA guidelines. This is a short resume. Clear terms of reference for the risk assessment are important. It's important that the risk manager pose a precise question to scientists. Okay. What other stakeholders should be informed? Is there any stakeholder informed yet? Did they communicate something to the public? That's very important to take in account when we decide what to do. Has been communicated something, the notice is public or is not public? First question. And then, if yes, what stakeholders I should inform? Because they can help me in many ways. They can help me performing the risk assessment. They can help me containing the risk, because if I had a problem in the, in the egg sector, if I bring on my side as an authority the trade association at European level, probably I can get voluntary measure very quickly to avoid the risk, also the damages to the brands of the associate of the trade association. If the risk is real, usually, in my experience, the companies are very keen to withdraw the products and to do what has to be done. The huge ones want to avoid brand damage, want to avoid huge loss in stock options, in the value of the company. It's not a problem to spend some thousands of euro or dollars to withdraw a product from the market. And then they could help me in communicating the risk, because they have privileged channels to communicate, like internet, like the website, the social networks, connection with the press. So it's very important to decide which stakeholders could be involved in the process. Level of risk. Okay, what is the hazard is the first question clearly, but what do we know about any related risk? Scientists already perform a risk assessment. That's important to know, especially when we need to issue an urgent advice. This kind of risk has been evaluated by other food safety authority. Can I borrow risk assessment? Can I start from a risk assessment that has been made in the past and see if it's applicable to my case, if this can help me? Who performed the risk assessment? And was reputable, the source was reliable or not? And again, has something already been communicated about this risk? Is known to the public or is not known? And so we can have problems very, very old and recurrent. We can have new issues like, I don't know, nanomaterials, which are not well known to the public, for instance. Nature of the hazard. Also to classify the hazard is very important in light of the communication. Is natural or artificial? I don't have data, I don't have surveys, but I'm sure that if we speak of an artificial hazard, the level of consumer attention will be totally different. It will be perceived very bad by the public opinion compared to a natural risk. It's more easy to explain to consumers that chicken usually has salmonella on the skin than to explain a contamination at industrial level. Okay? Because it's different to the level of blame that consumers will put on the industry, on the product. Completely different. Again, it occurs naturally from technological intervention. Is the technology perceived as unacceptable due to the possible related risk? Think about something that could break out about a wrong risk assessment on GMOs. They are so controversial right now. Think is at a certain point someone said, well, all the research done in the past, all the dozens of assessment of safety done by EFSA or an FDA are crap. Okay? Think of the reaction of the public. That will be huge because it's a technology which is still not perceived as safe by the consumers. Also, if scientifically we could start to say that maybe it is, but it's not accepted as such. That's a fact. It's not accepted here. It's not accepted here. I don't know, honestly. You tell me. In Europe, in the United States, in many countries. Is there an alternative? That's another good question. We could suggest an alternative way to process this food, an alternative way to manage this kind of hazard. To give an option is always important when you communicate. Who and what is affected? How many people are likely to be affected by the risk? Many, few, unknown. The worst case is unknown, the so-called lottery effect. We don't know which kind of consumers can be hit by this problem. Which sectors of the society, which groups of consumers. If the vulnerable groups like children, pregnant women, elder, allergic subject are hit, it's a high-level, high-priority situation. Otherwise, the risk probably could be contained better. what is the impact also on the environment, the plants, the animals. That should take it into account, especially in the risk management decision. Then. So it's important to have also an assessment on this point, also if often is not perceived as a priority. The levels of exposure. So, okay, sometimes we could find an hazard, but then we saw that the consumption of this food is very low in the European Union, or is very low in the subject that could be affected. So, in theory, the hazard could be very important, but then when we arrived to the magic numbers, we saw that it's not as bad. Again, the topic about animal health and environment will be important. Ability to control the risk. Can the exposure to the hazard or risk be avoided by the population? Is voluntary or involuntary? You can decide to not consume this food or not, or it's in the potable water, in the pipe tube, so you can usually, it's difficult to limit the exposure to consumers. Are certain groups more likely to be exposed? And can individuals take action to protect themselves? Not only as a risk manager can I impose measures that can limit the exposure, but also the individuals can act or not. And then the factors related to risk perception are really, really important, because we can do everything very well, everything explained until now, all our evaluation, but then if the risk is not perceived correctly by the consumers, we are at the starting point. We did nothing, basically, okay, because the effect won't be the one expected. So, important factors to consider when we take into account our audience are if the risk is new, if there is a history of similar events. It's the first time or it's the 10th time that we have this problem. Has been communicated in the past, the risk, if yes, in which manner it was effective or ineffective, because if it's effective, probably it's better to be coherent with the former risk assessment and the former risk communication. If it was ineffective, we have to change our strategy, but we have also probably to address the error made in other experiences, because otherwise we will leave open questions for consumers. What is the perception of the risk now due to the area interested, to the consumers? We did the example of GMOs. There are countries more sensible to the problems, others more open to GMOs. Are there public health campaigns or information related to the risk in the media, or disseminated by companies, by trade associations with campaigns? Think about the trans fats or the sugar, which is now under scrutiny for NCDs and diabetes and all related disease. Are there any news stories? So there's something on newspapers, and if yes, how these stories being perceived by the public? Again, we have to scrutinize this story, see if what has been communicated through the press is reliable or not. And if it's not reliable, we have to explain why, thinking that we are, for the consumers, basically the bad guys. So starting from a disadvantaged position. So it's very difficult to do this. It has to be made in a very gentle way. We cannot say what's in the newspaper is wrong, full stop. We won't be perceived as credible by the consumers. Okay, we have to explain very thoroughly why they are wrong and give alternatives. Are there different scientific views about the risk? And that's the nightmare of any risk manager and guy entitled to do risk communication. Because if we have 3 different agencies in Europe, as I told you, saying different things, honestly, it's nearly impossible to build an effective communication strategy. So it's a situation that should be avoided. Also, I don't know very well the structure of the competent authorities in your country, but in Italy and in many European countries, the responsibilities related to the food system are shared between the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Health, sometimes other ministry like the industry or others. So when we have also at risk management phase different communication messages coming from these authorities, it becomes really a problem to contain the reaction of the public opinions. Different levels of communication, different audience means different level of communication. We have already spoke about this. Different language. If we communicate to the academia, to other scientists, we can write 5 pages, 10 pages of scientific advice. For consumers, no more than 10 lines. Absolutely. Scientists are often unable to communicate the risk in an easy, understandable way. We need specialists. We suggest to the authority usually to have a multidisciplinary unit entitled to communicate. It's useful to have a lawyer, but it's not really my job to communicate. I do this, but I don't like to do communication, honestly, because it's very difficult for me. We need communication strategy expert. We need sometimes psychologists, expert in social sciences that can help us to predict the reactions. And we have also to try to figure out what will be the reaction. Also, if it will be a bad reaction, because we are in a situation where we have conflicting risk communication, conflicting risk management decision. Okay, we know that it will be bad, but how much will be bad? How we can contain this bad? Okay, and what level of interest is, again, it depends about the topic. And again, are they likely to protect themselves or not, or we have to protect consumers? So 2 brief case studies to show you some epic failures in communication by our authorities. But that's the truth. Also, some recorded, that will be recorded, but it's true. We will see the numbers. In Germany in 2011, we have a crisis because we have Escherichia coli, a very dangerous one, in an unidentified product. We discovered just at the end of the investigation that it comes from sprouted seeds. But in the first weeks of the crisis, we don't know. We just know it was something related to vegetables. Okay, but we cannot identify the source. EFSA did a very complex traceback exercise and then figure out the source of the contamination, but it was very complex. Consequences: 53 fatalities in a couple of weeks. So it was very worrying for the German authorities and for the Commission itself. The Commission did very well because started to do daily meetings and nearly daily updates to the public about the crisis, about what's going on. But the German authorities did not want to wait to communicate about the source of the epidemic. Also, if the uncertainty was really high, and we have these daily updates from the Commission saying, okay, this is the risk, consumers try to avoid to consume certain vegetables or consume they cooked or so on. Germans decide to do that themselves. And they point the finger on Spanish cucumbers, which was completely wrong. Both the origin, by the way, and the food. The losses for farmers in the fruit and vegetable sector, in the entire sector, because not only cucumber will be affected, were estimated in 800 and more million euro in 2 weeks. The source is the trade association interest of the European value. In addition, a temporary export ban on vegetables to Russia occurred. We were before the political problem we had with Ukraine. Now we have other bans, but Russia closed their borders. So the damage after this press release was huge. I can really remember ladies in our street markets saying, "Oh, we cannot buy cucumbers, nothing Spanish, nothing. Okay, today meat or fish." Okay, that was the mood in Italy, which was not concerned by fatalities, by nothing. We did not have cases in Italy at all. So you see with the entity of the damages. The Commission was obliged politically after a while to support the sector with exceptional measures. They distribute more than 200 million of euro in market aids distributed in all Europe because they cannot target a single business operator, single markets. So they distribute in a different percentage this aid in all the member states. Products most directly affected after studies resulted to be tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, and all the leaves sold in the street markets, street peppers. Consumer had massively refrained from buying these vegetables. As I told you, no one was buying vegetables of any kind anymore for 2-3 weeks, 1 month. Another case, then I will pass my last 2 slides, very interesting, was related to hepatitis A. In the last 5 years, we had many cases of hepatitis A coming from, especially from frozen berries or frozen strawberries from Egypt, from China, from different sources. We have this problem in Europe, but also in the United States, in Australia. In 2013, we had a huge increase of hepatitis cases in Italy. So, since it's not a deadly disease usually, and is not discovered immediately, you don't get a fever immediately or stomach pain or other reaction, it was very difficult to trace back each single case to a source. It was very difficult to define in the first instance if they were related to food or it was just a normal increase, variation in the cases reported every year in Italy. But then we noticed that we had problems also in other countries, so we started connecting the dots and we find the source of this increase of cases of hepatitis A. Frozen berries, but from where? No one ever discovered the source. Also through RASP, also through EFSA, we just know now after 3 years that probably the source were some food business operators in Poland for a kind of berry and others in Bulgaria for blackberry. But we never discovered the real source of contamination. So the situation was very, very tricky. And this crisis was known by the public, was in the media. So for 6 months, we had speculation by the media about the products involved, the source of the contamination, and so on. The food business operators in this sector, especially frozen foods, frozen berries, decide to withdraw any kind of frozen berry in the shops, any kind of dessert with frozen berries on it, because the risk was high and the reaction of the public was very, very bad. So they decided to take the most radical options to get clean from this mess. But our ministry did not communicate for 6 months. And when they communicate, they do a press release of 2 pages, very technical about the possible source, the traceability exercise they did, a lot of things. And they said to consumers to boil this frozen berry for 3 minutes. Unless you want to do jelly, you don't boil the frozen fruit, you eat that. So it was really a bad example of communication. In that case, it's an early communication, say, don't eat this frozen berry and don't eat dessert with raw frozen berry, it's the best way to communicate. Stop, very clear, precise. But for 6 months, we don't have any kind of official communication from the authorities. That was really another bad example. This concept applies very well also to the food business operators, because they are in the same situation, but they have their reputation at stake, their business at stake, and huge economic interest. Some principle. When we are in the United States, we apply more easily this concept. Communicate first, communicate truly, and communicate in an understandable way, and an understandable message. That's very easy. It's an easy concept for me to pass to the United States company, not so much to the European ones. We have a more conservative approach in Europe. It's difficult to convince a food business operator with a problem to communicate before the press and before the authority. But that's the key, because then you can keep the driver of the communication oriented in the direction you want. You decide what to tell and what don't tell to consumers. The lie usually is not an option, because at a certain point the real story pop out. I don't know why, but it happens all the time. But you can at least select the information in a first phase and decide what to communicate, how to communicate. If you leave the doors open to speculation, it's never a good option for the company. Then you should update your communication. It's not enough a single press release if the crisis lasts for several weeks. You have to update the situation, tell the consumers what are you doing. I'm starting a recall of the product. The recall is finished. The product has been destroyed. We do checks in our facility and everything was fine. We revised our procedures. You have to ensure the consumers that they can trust you. They can still buy your products, because your sales will be affected in the first week of the crisis. That's normal. But usually when a good communication is made and action is taken, in few weeks you see that your sales come back to the normal level. Also in the horse-meat scandal, we saw that in the end the reaction was not so tragic in terms of losses on the market, and now the consumption of meat, which is decreasing for many years, that's a trend. It's coming back to this comeback in 1 year to the normal level. So and have a plan in place. You cannot be unprepared. You have to consider risk communication in your recall procedures, usually, in your mitigation strategies in case of crisis. Avoid the lies, as I said. Avoid to conflict with the media. Try to get them on your side. The best way is to supply media with information that you select, again, that contains messages to ensure the consumer that they can trust you. Otherwise, you can have very bad articles in the press. Avoid to have more than one spokespersons, and be sure to have one prepared spokesperson. That's not what's happening in the company. Usually they put on the stage a cute guy that could be, that could be liked by the public, but it's not enough to be a cute guy and be good at speaking. You need to know what are you doing, and avoid multiple messages is important. Social media. Often companies refrain to use the social media, but that's an option that has to be considered in the modern world. Because I have this blog, foodlawlatest.com, and I can assure you that each of my articles is read 10 times any good scientific paper that I publish in European well-known review. Today the social media can reach a public that is so wide that they cannot be considered. Also the press in the paper is losing power, is losing immediateness. Okay, it's more easy to prevent the crisis if you use social network because you can react immediately. You can manage in real time the consumer complaints, the consumer reaction to your communication. You can monitor also how they react, and you can modulate your communication addressing their concerns. So it's good to have a press release on Facebook and read all the 1,000 bad comments you will receive, because from that comments you can define your strategy. And big companies, an example is Pepsi. Pepsi is very good in marketing. That I met in the past of communication on social network is made by Pepsi. They don't use the social network just to profile their consumers, to make marketing, but they use to monitor the food recalls. They communicate every safety issue through social networks, and they scan each single comment, each reaction to understand where the product is, which are the consumers' concerns. They have a unit to this kind of profiling, and it's amazing what they can do, having million and million of followers and reactions to each notification. But it's risky. I understand the concerns of the small, medium enterprise. It's risky because if you do wrong, it's forever. You cannot cancel nothing from the network. And that's the good and the bad of the network. While the press in paper is forget the day after it's published, and it's useless to tell lawyers to ask to all the newspaper in Taipei to rectify their notice of the day in advance, because they just put 3 small lines in a place very, very well hide on the page, and no one will read it. But what's in Google will be forever. So it's risky. It's time consuming because you need people doing this. So Pepsi can afford to hire people just to monitor social networks. Maybe a small medium enterprise cannot. Not all socials are the same. Again, we need experts. I learned by my mistakes on my platform how to blog, how to disseminate the news on the different platforms. Twitter allows you very, very short messages. Maybe it's not good for a complex advice on safety issues, very, very perceived, very bad by the consumers. Maybe it's better to use a blog, to use Facebook, which is for, you can find any kind of crap on Facebook, but it still allows you to write more and more photos, more data. And it requires a new mindset, as I told you. It's a completely different approach from the, it's a preventive approach you have to adopt. You are not reacting to the crisis, you are trying to prevent the crisis or to prevent the bad effects that you can have from the crisis. Another example of this power of the social media, power of the communication, is the palm oil crisis we are having in Italy. I don't know if you are aware of what's going on, but palm oil has been considered very dangerous by some NGOs, carcinogenic. Indeed, there are problems, well recognized by EFSA in 2004, so just 12 years ago. If you treat this palm oil and all the other vegetable oils at certain temperatures with certain methods, you can develop some contaminants. Okay, that's fine. But these NGOs goes very bad against palm oil. So the consumer perception in Italy and France now is that it's something carcinogenic as it is. Okay, no, they cannot perceive distinction. So supermarkets are retiring the products, are obliging their suppliers to reformulate the private labels without palm oil, sometimes using other oils like coconut, which is basically the same, but is not perceived as bad by the consumers. You see how risk perception is important. Coconut oil is more or less the same profile at levels of nutrient, the same risk if it is heated in a way that is not correct, but is not perceived unsafe as consumers. But the companies were totally unprepared. No one in the past, knowing of the issue, ever invested in communication ever put more messages about sustainability on their website, because there are also concerns about the sustainability of palm oil, the extraction method, the exploit of young workers or female workers in Indonesia, forest problems because they are destroying the forest in Indonesia, also they told. So never address these problems in more than 12 years. If you look at other companies, I can mention, not because they are my clients here, Unilever or Tetra Pak, go to the website of these guys. Look how much they have done in the last 20 years communicating about sustainability. The green issue, sustainability is a new wave which is coming. We will have more and more criticism in the next 5 years from the consumers about sustainability, I'm sure. They are prepared. It's 20 years that they work on this topic. So Tetra Pak, which do food packaging, is the biggest producer in the world. So I think that sadly contributes to the green problem and the waste problem in a significant way. Is not perceived, if you look some internal surveys that is done in Europe, as a non-green company. It's perceived as a green company. So you see how it's important to use the networks, social networks, and your website to communicate this content and to prevent the crisis, because you will have a lot of material to answer the criticism if you try to prevent. That's all. Cheshire. If you have any question, I will be around all day and we will have the panel. Please engage in the discussion. I will be happy to answer to all your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think learning risk communication is very critical in terms of make the risk assessment, risk management to be acceptable to the general public. So risk communication becomes an integral part of risk assessment, risk management. But also we're learning that these different sectors should be mutually supported. The last one we were learning is risk communication involving a great skill and expertise. So it's need all the stakeholders to put a lot of resources, right, to build up the good risk communication. So I think that we simply in Taiwan we simply cannot avoid this capacity building for the future. So just suggest our government with more resources in terms of the personal training and in terms of the experts building, etc. Thank you very much for your presentation. Of course, later in the roundtable discussion, we have opportunities to have an open discussion. But anyone of you going to have a quick question to Mr. Moraro? Is the lady over there? Can you identify yourself and make your question as short as possible?
Thank you for your excellent speech, Maura. We have to say risk communication is not easy. And you also mentioned one of the principles of risk communication is independent, right? I think if once the political issue is involved, the situation will become more difficult. Do you have any suggestion about risk communication accompanying with political issue? Thank you.
We can take one more and then you can answer. Professor Lin?
Thank you. This is Qingfu Lin from National Tsinghua University. Thank you for the fascinating presentation, which conveyed a lot of learning. And you mentioned different levels of risk communication. And my question is actually about different subjects of risk communication. That is what we are going to communicate throughout the process. So there are basically two kinds of risk communications. So one is about the communication of factual findings, and the other is the communication of policy decisions. And when we're talking about communication of factual findings, we focus more on scientific evidence, the data, the opinion of different scientists, majority or minority scientists. And when we're talking about policy decisions, we're focusing on political, social, or even cultural perspective of risk management and decision-making process. And they have different, say, levels of trust, different audience, different consequences, and also we face, it also kind of affect the way we deal with scientific uncertainty. And as you are well aware of, we have a lot of scandals in Taiwan recently, and one of the key missteps taken by, say, the government or risk regulator or risk communicator is that when they insist in taking a scientific and neutral tone and strategy in communication, while the actual problem or the actual subject of communication is about decision making, political or policy making. So that's kind of a tricky situation in Taiwan, and I suppose that's also the case in other countries. So my question is actually related to this kind of difference in subjects of risk communication. Shall we adopt different institutional designs and different strategies for different subjects of risk communication? Do all the principles apply to different kinds of subjects of risk communication?
Maybe I can address these two questions, and the other one maybe after or later. No, sorry, because it's enough complexity. Now, the two questions I think are linked because yes, the factual findings are better communicated with scientific data and can be communicated by the scientific bodies. For a political decision, it's more difficult. I would say that both subjects are greatly mistrusted today by the public. And that's why the cooperation is so important. Why they have to support themselves. In my opinion, it's better that the two functions are separated, but that's my idea. But work closely together, because you need the support. Each one needs the support of the other part. There's no political communication that will be trusted without scientific findings, data, and the support of the scientific authority, in my opinion, because the consumers will think, well, that's a statement, that's a political statement, stop. Who knows what's behind this political statement? On the other side, there is mistrust in science today. So this science has to be fully legitimate by the political power and by the mechanism, by the transparency of the process. Transparency in building trust and it's bridging this gap, in my opinion, is of capital importance because that could help consumers to trust